Hello! On behalf of Barnard College and Women in Hollywood, it is my honor to welcome you to the 11th Annual Athena Film Festival. This festival is dedicated to celebrating the stories of bold, courageous women leaders and the filmmakers who bring these stories to life. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Farida Badamosi, and I am a programmer at Athena Film Festival. To describe myself, I am a Black woman who has locks and who's wearing a black and white dress, and also Bride of Frankenstein earrings, which I'm very proud of. This year's festival would not be possible without the support of our dedicated sponsors. Please join me in thanking Athena's founding sponsor, the Artemis Rising Foundation, and its CEO and founder, Regina K. Scully, whose visionary leadership makes our work possible. A special thank you as well to our premier level sponsor, the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation, which shares our commitment to showcasing stories of women in science. To all of our sponsors, whose names you will see before each film and event, thank you for your commitment to challenging our culture to be more inclusive and inspiring audiences in the process. This year, we wanted to create something new and exciting to bring to our audience. So we programmed 8 different program areas that we believe react and respond to our current moment. This conversation is part of our Nothing About Us Without Us program area. This rallying cry, which began in the disability rights movement in South Africa in 1993, has since been applied to multiple movements and causes. In this program area, we deep dive into representation and how in these times of great change, we must keep asking, who is this change serving and who is leading? I'm so excited for you to listen to this panel, which is titled Disability Access and Visibility in Film and Television. It's going to be an amazing conversation. I want to welcome the moderator, Catherine Kulik, so that we can get this conversation started.
Hey, everybody. Welcome, and thank you for coming to our panel here. I'm Catherine Kudlick, and I'm director of the Paul K. Longmore Institute on Disability at San Francisco State University. And we run the Superfest International Disability Film Festival. It's the world's longest running disability film festival. And we think a lot. We train students to think about disability in new ways. The judging is all done of, by, and for people with disabilities to show cutting edge, really cool portrayals of people with disabilities in representation and also in producing films that are accessible. So I'm really excited that this panel is happening. Just to give you a little description, I am a white woman with short silver fashionable hair and fashionable glasses and a fashionable sweater with 2 little boingy things on it. I will let anybody that's just hearing these words imagine what those are like, but they're kind of little strings. Anyway, I'm really glad everybody's here, and I'd like the panelists to turn to the panelists. Kristin, since we work together in another capacity, I'll turn to you first.
Yeah, I'm Kristin Lopez. I'm the TV editor at IndieWire. Visual description of myself: I am a white woman with brown hair, wearing super cool glasses and a blue shirt that does not look like something that you would wear inside exclusively.
And I guess that leaves Maysoon.
Oh, hi, I'm Maysoon Zayed. I look like the Lost Kardashian. I have cinnamon long blonde hair. I'm wearing inappropriately sparkly lipstick. I'm sitting in front of a bookshelf full of books I've never read and never will, but people gave them to me for free, so I feel the need to advertise them. And then for the Athena Festival, I have a nice big evil eye to protect me from all the jealous failures in Hollywood.
Great. So I thought maybe we could start out, and I'll kind of give a little opening maybe. People's first representations of disability in Hollywood that made them think of themselves a little bit. And for me, I'll just start. It was the 1963 film, The Miracle Worker. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't positive. With Patty Duke running around saying "wah wah wah wah," and it was terrifying. And I felt so bad for her because she looked so helpless. And Annie Sullivan with her dark glasses, and it was a real setback. So I kind of had hoped that kind of over the years these would get better, looking back on it, but it's taken a while. So yeah, that was my kind of. But I will give one shout out. Terry Galloway has a mock version of that. She's a comedian, disability comedian, and it's called Annie Dearest, and it's making fun of it. It's really very fun. I don't know where you can get it online, but it's enjoy. So whoever wants to go next, go for it.
Yeah, so for me, if we're talking about, I situate this question in two ways. So the first time I saw disability represented and the first time I saw myself represented, because I feel those are two very different things. The first time I saw disability represented, I always point to something like the Munchkins in The Wizard of Oz, but I think the one that resonates, and I've written about this and I talk about it a lot, is the character of Zelda from Pet Sematary, specifically the 1989 feature film. That's a character that terrifies the living daylights out of me to this day, and I think a lot of it is because I saw somebody that was physically disabled, and not, when you're a kid, you don't have any other disabled people around you, and you just have a medical approach to it. As a kid, I remember sitting there thinking like, oh my God, that's going to be me, like that's what's going to happen, and it didn't help that it was obviously a male actor in female getup. So, it really stuck with me. I've slowly come to kind of reclaim that character, but it's still scary. And then the first time I saw myself represented, I point to the ABC, short-lived ABC series Speechless, which is about a physically disabled teenage boy living with his family. And that came out in, I think, 2017. That was when I felt like I saw a character that approached something close to my experience. So, those are the two most opposite ends of the spectrum. But I think when you're growing up as a disabled person, that's really all you have is the worst case scenario. And then maybe something that closely hits you. Mason, I don't know if that's similar for you.
No, not at all. It's interesting how opposite our experiences are. And I'll just jump off with the fact you said something like growing up disabled, you don't see other disabled people. I saw disabled people all the time because I spent my summers in Palestine, which is a war zone. So you have a lot of, you have amputees, you have people with, congenital birth defects, because God knows what's happening in the soil and stuff there. So I was around a lot of disabled people. And I didn't identify with Speechless at all, because I just don't identify with white men. Like, no matter what white men kind of do or say.
Valid.
Ever get towards identifying with. So my first memory of disability, because I do love that Kristin broke it up into like seeing me and seeing just disability. My first recollection of disability was Adam on Little House on the Prairie. So Mary, the older sister on Little House on the Prairie, goes blind. She gets scarlet fever. She goes blind. And she is super duper angry until she meets Adam. And Adam runs a blind school, and Mary marries Adam. So my first thought was that you have to marry a person with the same disability. That's the only way that works. And then Mary and Adam's baby burns to death. So I got to, feel the stigma against disabled parenting. And then Adam gets caught in an explosion. And guess what? His blindness just goes away. He can see me. And so I was a young disabled Palestinian girl wondering, should I blow myself up to heal myself? Luckily, I did not have access to those type of things. And I didn't, but I always think of the fact that like Adam banged himself on the head and he was fine. Val Kilmer walked through a plate glass and he was fine. And like, I wonder how many disabled people have like done some sort of self-injury thinking that it would heal them. The first time I saw myself was I wanted to be on General Hospital daytime soap opera, which I'm currently on. And I was like 5 years old. I pursued the dream. I went to Arizona State University. I studied theater. I went on auditions in New York City. And that's when I realized that nobody on TV looked like me. So if there was disability, it was white. It was often boys. It was definitely like, cisgendered, hetero, like very, so where I did.
It still is in many ways.
Yeah. I mean, percentage wise, 81% of the images that we see of disability are men. 19% are women, and like we have like maybe 1% LGBTQ. But where I did see myself was Richard Pryor. Richard Pryor doesn't have cerebral palsy, but he was a shaking stand-up comic of color. And that was kind of where I saw myself, and very much why I became a comedian, because I felt like, okay, I'm from the island of misfit toys. Nobody looks like me except for in the world of comedy. Richard Pryor, because he was disabled, but also Ellen, because she wasn't conventionally beautiful. Rosie O'Donnell, because she was fluffy like me and kind of, rough around the edges. So it was really in stand-up comedy where I saw myself first. And I have to shout out Jerry Jewell, because Jerry Jewell was the OG of cerebral palsy on TV. She was Blair's cousin on Facts of Life. And then she was a super, super badass in Deadwood. And there's no Maysoon without a Jerry Jewell, but I just happened not to have realized that we had the same disability until I was much older.
Great. So you're queens of the world, and you get to tell Hollywood producers and filmmakers and whoever what they need to hear. What does that sound like? What are these filmmakers? What do you want them to know?
I don't know where you got that, Catherine, but if I limp in telling Hollywood producers what they need to do, they are not buying my project.
It doesn't matter. Let's dream for a bit to know what the bigger picture could be like, and then we can kind of ratchet it back and say, here's what we need to get there. But what would it be like? What does the world need to see as the great depiction of disability and disabled people's experiences on film?
Yeah, so I'm going to back up on what you said and just be very clear that no, I'm not going to give like a fantasy image of what it is. I'm going to say what it is and what it should be. But okay. I've spent literally 20 years doing this work. There's been absolutely no advancement in Hollywood. When you walk in and you say, I need a set that's universally accessible, I want 20% crew, I want disabled characters played by disabled actors, they do not call you back. So I do continue to do that, but clearly I've never made it onto screen. So everything I create is kind of shot down, because right now we live in a society where disability is still shunned. And I think in the past 5 years, the powers that be have finally started having the conversation about being inclusive about disability. But at this point, we're only allowed to have 3 storylines. Heal me, you can't love me because I'm disabled, or kill me. And the way that we combat that is by having disabled people telling the stories. So like in the seldom instances that we see disability on screen, we're not usually the people telling the stories. So when I go into a meeting, I absolutely unequivocally say, we have to have 20% disabled representation on screen. We have to have 20% disabled representation on crew. We have to have audio captioning, open captioning, universally accessible sets. We have to have shorter days. We have to have options for people who are neurodivergent to participate. And it's really unfair that as creatives, we're doing that heavy lifting.
Yeah, agreed.
SAG-AFTRA has worked really hard to get disability inclusion in the inclusion rider. And I really want to see more of people doing the disability advocacy work so that the talent and the creatives don't have to, because it's really unfair that we have to do that heavy lifting.
Agreed. The one film that's kind of broken through in some ways is Crip Camp. I know that's not Hollywood, but Netflix, next best thing, I guess. And for all of its complexities and maybe it hits a lot of the notes and doesn't hit all of them or whatever, but it's still it is an opportunity. And one of the points I was thinking about when you were both talking earlier is the fact that most films about disability only have like one, there's only one disabled person, and then they're like surrounded by non-disabled people. And the thing with Crip Camp that's really interesting, and I think hopefully bodes well for the future, is that there's more than one disabled people. There's a community, there's a sense of pushback and engagement and, whatever.
That's nonfiction. We've
okay, fair, yeah.
That in nonfiction, where I think we've been excluded from fiction. But just a quick fun fact: me and Nicole Newham, who is the director of Crip Camp, are in cahoots right now developing a show where 90% of on air is going to be disabled. But again, it's not. But again, it's nonfiction, and I can't seem to get any of that in the fiction world.
Yeah, that's interesting. Unless it's Pixar, I guess. But yeah.
No, to answer the question, I mean, Maysoon talked a lot about the stuff that I would have included as well. For me, I think what I continue to champion in my writing is a couple things. I want an emphasis away from white male disabled late in life. I think that's the three main ways that creatives get around casting authentically. So if you have somebody who has to be disabled late in life, that means that you have to have a significant part of the story where they are able-bodied. And while we can create cities out of pixels and we can create superheroes, we can't find a convincing way to make a disabled actor look able-bodied for any amount of time. So that's my big thing. My other thing, and Maysoon kind of touched on this, is that I think, I don't want to say it's easy to cast disabled, but I feel like we're at this point where there is this emphasis from showrunners and directors that if they cast a disabled actor, their job is done. And Maysoon touched on it, which is that we need more below the line. We need more disabled directors. We need more disabled screenwriters. I want disabled costume designers, grips, lighting. I think that's harder because there's this idea of, well, hell, it's hard to find an actor. We're not going to find somebody who's below the line. And that's what I think we need far more of, because it's one thing to say, we had to, and even though this is an excuse, we had to cast an able-bodied person. Okay, fine. Then your set better damn well be filled with disabled people in other areas, because why not at that point? So I think that's what I want to see, is far more emphasis on not having Hollywood take the easy road, which is strictly casting. It needs to be the entirety of a film set. And it needs to be about women of color. It needs to be about LGBTQ. And I think another thing, just being a woman growing up in America, in the world, I want to see more I want to see less able-bodied women sitting down in wheelchairs. I want to see more women that look like me that can get, the guy. I think there's still such an emphasis with disability that we don't show it because it's not aesthetically pleasing. Right. We don't want to see somebody who does not look like they're 36, 24, 36, getting a guy. And that's what I want to see more of, because when I grew up as a young girl, like, I had no idea what dating looked like, because all I knew was that I already had the deck stacked against me. And so I worry about the generation of teenage girls who are disabled growing up now and not having any role models and ways to navigate that. So those are the big things that I would love to see down the line.
Sure, absolutely. And it goes back to the storytelling element, like who's writing the stories, who's getting the scripts in front of the producers and all of those pieces as well. The thing I would add that's kind of interesting is I wonder what percentage of people that work on those, what did you call them, below the line positions, do have disabilities, but the ableism of Hollywood is so crushing that even if they did, they would be sort of, they're hiding it, and it's not lifted up as something worthy of mentioning and actually contributing to the diverse culture of Hollywood. And I don't know what percentage that might be, but if you just think about the number of disabilities and visibility and invisibility and all of those pieces, it might be higher than we think. And if it's a shift in the culture that allows people with disabilities to be saying, hey, I'm here and I'm doing these things and here's what I need to do them. And maybe if I need these things, you can learn from them and benefit from some of them as well.
I think we have absolutely no way of knowing how many people with invisible disabilities are behind the scenes or even on screen. Due to the fact that the stigma is so strong that, like, when I do projects, I always say that the person themselves have to identify as being disabled, because we have
agreed. Oh yeah, absolutely.
When you have a society that's passing, that society is not including anyone with visible disabilities.
It's a double-edged sword. It's a total double-edged sword, because there's so much rampant ableism that people, and that doesn't just extend to Hollywood, that extends to jobs in general. I know many people that won't put on a job application, but they ask, do you identify as somebody with a disability, because they believe that's automatically going to go in the trash. But with Hollywood specifically, there's that other side of it. I know that recently I was talking about the lack of disabled performers during the Golden Globe nominations. And I had a colleague say that Anthony Hopkins was a disabled performer. And I said, how? And they said, because he has Asperger's. Here, he's talked about having Asperger's in this article. And I said, yeah, but Anthony Hopkins has never really talked, he hasn't discussed the challenges of being a person with Asperger's. And really, this is a very recent, announcement. And it's really hard to identify sometimes with a performer that's been working in this industry for 40 some odd years to then come out and say, I've been a disabled performer, but then also really isn't seeming to do anything with their platform and their privilege to kind of pay that forward. So it does really become a double-edged sword that I have no doubt that there are people who are passing, as Maysoon put it. But at the same time, I think it also becomes an excuse for people to say, here, we found one. Your argument against
exactly. Yeah. You're always complaining, people. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And like, one of the things that we have to do is that we have to create spaces where disabled people can apprentice or intern in a paid position, because in acting, we've got the talent. I know over 4,000 actors. I can cast any age, any role, any disability, any race. I got you. Just call me up, casting directors. But when it comes to crew, due to the fact that the education system in and of itself is really exclusionary to disabled people, sets are not built as accessible, and people are not creating spaces where they can get the training as an AD or a camera grip so that they can become a lead camera operator, so they can become a director. Or, we're forced to live in poverty, so becoming an executive producer is pretty much a challenge too. So I think that when you are a disabled person in a position of power, like, with me going in to do this docuseries with Nicole Newham, we were able to go in there and say, like, if we can't find the talent, let's get them into, preliminary basic positions, so that they can then learn the skills, so that on a future film production, documentary production, they can actually be a lead. Because I think it's really important to have disabled people at every level, right? So decision makers, and then, spilling coffee on an actor.
Maysoon's on this. There needs to be more mentorship and more allyship. And I think that's also the most frustrating thing. I've talked to disabled performers in franchise television, and they've said that, if Steven Spielberg said tomorrow, hire this person, that there's no reason that they would not take Steven Spielberg's word for it and hire whoever that they wanted. Someone like Steven Spielberg has the privilege to put a nobody in an A-list role and make them a star. And that's where I think that we need more allyship from the able-bodied people who have privilege out there to say, hey, we need to be doing this. And I think it's a problem because we're still going around in circles about diversity and inclusion, where it's race, gender, sexual orientation, and the conversation ends. And if we can't even include disability as part of an inclusion initiative, then how are we going to change anything? So there's so much systemic hurdles to this discussion that I think that for a lot of people just feel so overwhelming, whereas those of us in the community have been like, hi, adversity is kind of the name of the game. We already know how to do this. So, you know, it shouldn't be a challenge.
To piggyback what Kristin said, taking it a step further, if Tyler Perry or Steven, Spielberg said, I'm going to require 20% disabled representation on all of my sets, behind and in front of the screens, that would be a game changer right there. And then also, if really famous disabled actors start turning down the disabled roles, right? Because disabilities win awards. So every actor wants to take their shot at the Oscars. They want to take their shot at the Golden Globe. And absolutely disgraceful, utterly violent, anti-autism movie is up for Best Musical or Comedy Film at the Golden Globes this year. So actors know that disabilities win awards. We need people like Bryan Cranston and like The Rock to say no to those roles. To make it a taboo that famous people will not take visibly disabled roles anymore. Like, that's a big part of allyship, is for them to say no. And the tired excuse of, oh, but we need a star. You make the star the co-star. You make the star the co-lead. And then you put the disabled person like Marlee Matlin 36 years ago in Children of a Lesser God next to William Hurt, and you introduce that actor.
Yep. How do you think we could convince people, a general public, so you think about the people that are at this presentation and just in general, how do we convince them other than ticking off another diversity box? What does disability bring? And these are great initiatives, but how would we convince people that this is a good idea?
Disability brings $8 trillion of buying power. 8 trillion, TRILION, $8 trillion of buying power. That's all you need to know.
I would also say, and it's something that I've noticed a lot in the writing that I do, which is about a lot of time about disability. I get so many emails from people that say, hey, I didn't think of disabled issues before I started reading your stuff, or I didn't know that this was an ableist show until you did an article and pointed it out. And I think that what it really comes down to is a lot of people don't believe they know somebody with a disability. It's very analogous to the LGBTQ movement in the 80s, and the belief that they change their minds if they know somebody. And I think that's where we're at, is that I have a lot of friends who did not realize that the issues that I was bringing up were real until they traveled with me, until they went out with me, until they saw it firsthand. And I think that that's where we're at. Movies and television have such a huge platform we've seen, they've taught us about other cultures, they've taught us about other times, they've taught us about other people, and they can teach us, as we've seen negatively now, how to deal with people with disabilities. And they can also be a source for positive change. I can tell you, I've had so many discussions with people when they meet me and they hear my disability, they're like, oh, I saw Unbreakable. I saw Samuel L. Jackson. Do you like that movie? What do you think about that movie? And that becomes the conversation. And I somebody who's seen that movie, it's fine, whatever. But at the same time, it opens up a conversation of people that probably would not know those things unless they saw it. And that needs to become a force for good and not a force for instilling old stereotypes. So I would say that there definitely needs to be, social media is a great thing nowadays, puts you in touch with millions of people that you never knew in your life. And I think that people really need to be more active viewers of media and notice if there's a disability narrative and if it's positive or negative. But I think they also need to be more, and we're seeing this with post-election and all the things, be more active in their news, read disabled writers, seek out disabled writers and creatives, and just be more aware of the lack of us and question why that is. I think at the base level, that's where we should be.
Yeah. I just, everything that Kristin says is really incredible. I'm a big Kristin fan, but like Hollywood don't care. They don't care who's learning what.
Yeah, it's about butts and seats.
But the talent exists. And I think what Kristin nailed there is the idea that like people don't know that we actually exist. They don't know that the stories that they are telling are offensive. And that's why when like we go on social media and we destroy a movie like Music or put an end to Me Before You's ticket sales before they even start, that's kind of the way that we teach Hollywood that if you do not include us, we will end you.
Right.
Like we become a force in social media that we just weren't before, you know?
Right. Well, there's always these, periodically they're cyclical, right? These predictions that Hollywood's on its last, like whatever. Nobody's going to movies, nobody's can afford to make them, or, whatever. There's a ton of rumors. And here we are in the middle of a pandemic where a lot of our movie making and movie going and all of those habits have changed, and people are thinking in new ways about options for disability. And I wondered if each of you could kind of comment on this COVID moment as perhaps an opportunity, and maybe we put too much stock in Hollywood. I know that's where the money and that's where the whatever is, but could we be at this pivotal cultural point where maybe that's not the end all and be all, and that people with disabilities might be on the forefront of, one, acknowledging some of the new ways of doing things, and two, actually challenging what everybody takes for granted?
I mean, for me, it's something that I've been talking about a lot since the pandemic started, specifically from a movie theater and a film festival perspective. Great example, this discussion that we're having. Going to a film festival is an incredibly expensive undertaking, and if you're a person with a disability, travel in general is very inhospitable. And so, I think having virtual festivals this year democratize the festival sphere. There's no reason that disabled creatives and disabled attendees cannot go to Sundance at this point. We've proven that there is a way to make it virtual. From a movie theater standpoint, I laugh because people are saying, oh, VOD is the end of the movie theater. We said that in the 50s with television. Didn't happen. But I've heard from so many people with disabilities who have said that they finally were able to see a movie opening weekend with everybody else on their television. And I love that. The movie theater space is one that is incredibly ableist. It's gotten worse with the reserved seating and 3D. There are a multitude of reasons why people with disabilities cannot go to a movie theater. That doesn't mean that they don't want to be involved in culture and see something. And the same day and date releases that HBO and Warner Brothers are doing is a game changer. I want to see that continue. From a creative standpoint, too, I think that as we're seeing with stuff like Sundance, if the virtual sphere continues in some capacity, then there's no way that festivals can't say, why are our submissions not including disabled filmmakers? If making a film is one where you don't have to travel to promote it, then submitting and all of that could be a lot easier, and it could open things up. So I see multiple, as much as you can call a benefit of this pandemic, I see multiple areas where people with disabilities can finally start feeling included in media. Maybe not necessarily on screen, although there's reasons that can happen too. But I think just for being able to consume media after decades of being shut out, that's a big thing.
I love the idea of finally being able to see something on opening weekend.
Right? It's so simple. And I think, I've gotten into arguments with people on social media about, you're calling for the end of movie theaters. And I'm saying, no, why can't we just have both?
Both.
Like, why is that not an option? Why is it a zero-sum game? Why is it either or?
I think, like you said, this is something we can apply to the world at large, not just Hollywood, which is the desire for people who are disabled, who now have accessibility that they didn't have pre-pandemic, to not be stripped of that post-pandemic. Sundance is the worst, most inaccessible, most inhospitable disability, like for disabled filmmakers festival in the world. I've been like all over the world. It's the absolute worst. So being able to participate via something like this on a panel is a game changer. for me as a creative, I love auditioning on Zoom because most auditions are inaccessible and because they see what I'm going to look like in the frame. You know, disability is the opposite of fantasy, and Hollywood and fiction and, you know, are considered an escape, and people are very afraid of disability because it's their worst fear to become disabled like me. So when I'm on screen and they see like, oh wow, she really pops, and like I didn't have to wear shoes, you know, so I didn't have to like worry about the heels. I love the auditioning, but again, I feel bad because I feel like we're yin and yang right now, and I'm the goddess of darkness. No. There's no alternative to mainstream media. There's no alternative to Hollywood. Separate is not equal. Making movies on Zoom is not the solution. The reality is 80% of American households can't afford streaming, can't afford video on demand, can't afford to buy Pete Davidson's movie for $30 to watch, and they're watching CBS, NBC, ABC, and Fox. And if we don't have representation and power in those spaces, we're not making the changes that we need to make, because positive images of disability can literally save lives. We have a day of mourning for disabled people killed in America by their caretakers. It's been proven that when they see an image of a disabled child, like the one on Speechless, or a disabled lawyer like Michael J. Fox on The Good Wife, that the stigma against those disabilities is less, the fear is less. But I want to take it to a whole nother level too, which is that disabled people need to be cast in roles that are not written as disabled. Yes. So like on Scandal, one of the gladiators could have been a wheelchair user. One of the gladiators could have been blind. On Schitt's Creek, someone could have been neurodivergent. Like, we're not in shows that are not disability centric or about disability. And I want to see more of us just everywhere. Yep, absolutely.
I want to touch on the issue of, I think the term is consuming films and getting to watch them, because one of my pet obsessions or advocacy efforts is around audio description for people with vision impairments. And, there's been captioning, and that's gotten a lot better. It's still got a ways to go, but it's there. And audio description, for people that don't know what it is, because it's so rarely presented, it's an audio track that could be even built into the program if the directors and movie makers were smart about it. They would have this creative aspect of audio description that could be woven in, but otherwise it's a separate track that narrates what's going on visually to people that can't see it. And I think audio description is a really great subjective and has tons of possibilities. And there's a lot of, it's kind of the Wild West right now. There's a group of people that see it as kind of sterile and there's rules and you've got to follow them. There's another group that's saying, woof, throw caution to the winds. Let's have some fun with audio description and build it in and make it really interesting. And I'm hoping that we can actually push movie making and movie attendance so that audio description becomes this other layer in filmmaking that's like maybe what the talking films were in the early 20th century, that it completely changed people's ideas of what movies were and what they expected of it. And I'm curious, in your worlds, each of you, if as you think about filmmaking or even presenting your roles or looking over scripts and whatnot, if you see opportunities maybe, or you think about possibilities for these other forms of access for people that are maybe non-visual, or people that want to experience cinema differently. And I'm just curious what you'd make of that.
I mean, as a journalist, it's something that I notice a lot. I watch a lot of television shows and films in advance via proprietary platforms like Vimeo and Indie and all of that. And especially, it's something that I know that Marlee Matlin's talked about on social media maybe 2 or 3 years ago, the lack of closed captioning on screeners for Academy viewers. But I mean, even just as a journalist, the lack of just basic closed captioning on TCA panels, on screeners for television episodes. It's non-existent. And I'm fortunate that I am, obviously I wear glasses, but I'm not visually impaired significantly enough that I have captioning on because I'm a weirdo who likes to read. It's great for multitasking for me. But if I was a visually impaired journalist, I couldn't do my job. That would not be an option. And that is showing the lack of belief that people with disabilities are going to ever be in a journalistic position. It's something that I also noticed a lot about screening rooms. The lack of wheelchair seating in a screening room is the coded belief that a person with a disability is never going to occupy that space. And that says a lot by not doing anything. So I think that it's a blanket statement that we need to have closed captioning and audio descriptions everywhere. I mean, that should just be, to me, I'm going to be bold and say it feels like a fundamental right. I mean, it's the easiest way to get a community to feel included. And, for me as a journalist, again, I worry about the generation of journalists that want to be in this industry and might have visual impairments that say, how the heck do I do this? Because there's no closed captioning and it's not even something that's considered.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. Lisa? Wait.
She's muted.
I was muted. I was copying you muting, and the entire time, Kristin, I didn't mute. And the reason I didn't is because I never ever remember to unmute. I just build it in. It's a non-negotiable. Again, this comes with extreme privilege. I've been a stand-up comic and public speaker for 20 years. I have monster public speaking contracts like Hillary Clinton. So I insist that every single space I perform in is accessible to the audience and accessible to the performer, because they love having accessible audiences and not accessible stages. Anything that I'm doing for film or television must have audio descriptions, must have open captioning, must have disability representation. And right now, I have been in a 14-month long contract negotiation on a comic book series I'm working on, because we are trying to get the audio version to drop on the exact same day that the comic book does. And it's been 70 conversations explaining why it can't come out 2 weeks later. 70 conversations.
Wow, I get it. Yeah.
Later, and then I was like, listen, if it comes out without an audio version, I'm going to read it on YouTube. And then nobody's going to buy the book, and none of us are going to money. But you can make it a non-negotiable. And unfortunately, like, a lot of it is about the economy and just saying you're going to have a whole nother genre, like whole nother group of people buying this book that would never buy it if they can't, hear it. But every single time, I'm very, very conscious about not just making things accessible for myself, but universally accessible. And that includes that any book I've written, any film script I've written, anything that I do live, I don't say crazy, I don't say stupid, idiot, moron, dumb. I also don't allow or use ableist language in anything that I do. And I think that, like, exercising my work of ableist language that is very mainstream is super fun and challenging as a creative person. Like all the different ways that I can say ignorant now are pretty spectacular, because crazy and stupid were my two favorite words in the world. And it was very hard to replace them, but I've taken it even to the level where I won't use ableist language. So if you have the power to bake it in, bake it in. And if you don't have the power to bake it in, shame them and be like, look, if you release a book by a disabled author that's not accessible to blind people, you're going to get dragged in the media, and you don't want that. So I'm saving you from that hell.
Yeah. Do you have like a checklist for people that you could share with people that know what they can and should ask for budding disabled filmmakers? Or, I mean, I realize you're in a good position and a privileged one, but for people that at least know what those look like, do you have somewhere people can go to get those?
I do have, I have a personal list that I be more than willing to post. I recommend going to Lights Camera Access, LCA, Lights Camera Access. They have an amazing checklist. And then there's also SAG is working right now on an accessibility like writer that kind of spells out what sets need to look like. I wish I had a website I could send you to right now, but it's the same thing as everything else with disability. You know, we just can't afford to build it all. So
no, I get it. Yeah.
But in my contracts, I mean, my agents are William Morris and Deborah. So with my speaking contracts, it is literally spelled out in my contract. Must be accessible. She must have interpreters. If the event is longer than 15 minutes, there has to be 2 interpreters. You know, so I have to take them through every level. It's exhausting and brings us full circle to the beginning of this conversation where I really need it to stop being the entertainer's responsibility.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. Let's see, how are we doing? I'm curious what got each of you into the work that you're doing as creatives, as journalists, as I mean, we had a little taste of it from Maysoon because of Richard Pryor. Yes, thank you.
That's not why I got into me.
No, I'm teasing you a little bit, but yeah.
I was born a superstar. Like, I was just born to be a performer. Done. The day I was born, I knew I'd be a performer. I'm not good at anything else. It's the only thing I'm fit to do. And I was just born to be a performer. I wasn't inspired by like Lucille Ball. I don't have a great struggle story. I got paid my 3rd show. I'm really just a disappointment when it comes.
No, not at all. So what was your first performance? What performance though? What was your first performance that you remember being a performance? Like where you thought, yes, this is me.
Like literally I've been performing my entire life. I've been on stage since I was born. Yeah.
So it was that coming out in the hospital room, in the delivery room. Yeah.
I literally entered the world fist first, which is how I ended up with cerebral palsy, which is as grand of an entrance as you can be. And it always cracks me up when people are like, so the TED Talk was like the big moment. And I'm like, no, I did a Live Nation tour before that. I did a movie with Adam Sandler. I've literally been a rock star my entire life. And what that tells you is how disgusting Hollywood is with disability, because I sell out 1,000-seat theaters doing stand-up comedy on Live Nation tours. I don't have a Netflix special. I've never been invited on Colbert, Kimmel, Conan O'Brien, any of those shows to do 2.5 minutes of stand-up comedy. Whenever I pitch my comedy, I'm considered inspirational instead of a comedian, when I'm clearly a professional comedian. So what I'm saying is that, like, I knew I had to be 100 times better than any of my competition. I knew that I had to work harder, faster, stronger, better, the entire thing. And with all the work I've done and all the success I have, I'm still 100% on the Z list, and I haven't even made a dent in what level I should be working on, considering the work I've done.
Mm-hmm. Fair. Yeah. Kristin?
Yeah, for me, you know, it's I love that I have Maysoon as my wing woman in this talk, because for all of her awesomeness, there's me that like takes the totally like different fork in the road. You know, I kind of came to, I knew that I wanted to do something involving writing for a long time. And it was a career that I really fell into out of mostly necessity, because I knew that getting a job as a wheelchair user was going to be difficult. And I needed something for a long time that I could do from home, because I was kind of at the mercy of my family getting me from A to B. And you know, just kind of, when you're the only disabled child in your family, you're kind of working on their schedule. So writing was something that I could do from home. I could make money. And it was something that I was really into, but I didn't want to talk about being disabled, mostly because I didn't think there was anything interesting for me about talking about myself and talking about disability, again, because for me, I was the only disabled person in my house, in my neighborhood, in my high school. So I didn't have any experience other than my own. And I didn't think I was that cool or interesting. So I was like, oh, that's, something. But as I started to immerse myself in being like, oh, writing can actually become my career. This could be a big thing. And I just started writing here and there. When you're freelancing, you're kind of throwing spaghetti at the wall to see what sticks. And I started writing here and there about disability. And I started noticing that the articles that I was writing about disability got a lot of attention, whether that was from people on social media who were angry at me or, celebrities that were retweeting it. And I was like, oh, okay, maybe this is something that is interesting. And I realized how few disabled writers were actually given the opportunity to write about disability. Anytime there was a disabled movie, I was seeing an able-bodied writer talk about it. And they were talking about it as a film and the merits of whether it's good or bad. And they didn't know anything about how me as a disabled viewer was seeing this movie as grossly offensive. So it really became something I started to realize very late in the game that, like, okay, I have this experience. It's just mine, but it's something that nobody else is talking about from this angle. And if I have the opportunity to kind of take back the narrative and say, we should be talking to disabled people about their experience with these films, then we should. And the working with IndieWire has just kind of been a huge deal because it's such a big platform, and it's very overwhelming to get emails. It's something I still pinch myself, where I hear from young people in all parts of the globe saying, I didn't know I could be a journalist. I want to be a film critic, and I Googled disabled film critics and your name came up, and I want to know how to do this job. And I usually have to kind of be the disappointing adult and be like, so you're not going to get a lot of money, and it's going to suck, and you're going to have to prep for a lot of no's, and it's not just because of writing, it's going to be because of the disability thing. Like, that's going to be a big deal. But it's heartening to me that in the last couple of years, I don't feel as lonely about it as I used to, being kind of the disabled writer. There's a whole group of young people now that, I don't want to say I'm inspiring because I'm not nearly that like crazy about it, but that I definitely am kind of giving them the opportunity that, like, if you want to be poor and happy in this industry, like, you should have every right to do that. You should be able to be a part of this and talk about this. And, again, writing about movies helps people change their minds on movies. So it's part of it's a bigger thing.
And like, what a fun job just watching and writing about movies. Catherine, I changed my answer.
You changed? Okay.
I'll know that I've come into my own when I have a seat as a co-host on The View. So then you can have me on a panel after that, and I'll be like, it was when I sat in the seat at the View table that I knew I had finally.
Okay, fair enough.
And,
well, so
and
this is a nice...
invites me onto The View as something, then I will feel that I have arrived. So
I have to keep you in your bubble of being the only disabled person you know. Two disabled people on set. It causes instant combustion. I'm so sad that we're wrapping up. Catherine, what's our last question?
So your last question, I'll give you a choice. The first one is, what advice would you give to future kind of aspiring people that you want to see advance in the industry? And the second one, is there anything else you really want to say?
So my advice to anyone aspiring to be either in acting or theater and comedy is be good at what you do. Do not suck. Like, I get that you got a standing ovation at the talent show because you were the legless person doing cartwheels, but it's not going to cut it in Hollywood. So you need to be really good at it so that when you get a chance, you can go in there and show them that you have what it takes. Get a side hustle. Learn how to make balloon animals. That's like big money parties. Learn how to do makeup. Learn how to write. Learn how to work a camera. Learn how to do anything that you can to make money so that you can pursue your dream. If your dream turns into a nightmare, find another dream. You don't have to die trying. You can find another dream. And when someone says to you, if they won't cast you, create it yourself, do it yourself, tell them to go fuck themselves or to give you a $10 million budget, because it costs a lot of money to create our own stuff. And people are always saying, no one will put you on, then just create your own stuff. Well, I've spent the past 5 years creating my own stuff, and no joke, it's cost me $500,000. Like literally $500,000 just to get like 5 minutes on YouTube. So when they tell you to create your own stuff, tell them, I would love to create my own stuff. Give me the budget.
There. And Kristin.
I don't know how I can follow that up. I mean, from a journalistic standpoint, I mean, a lot of what Maysoon says still applies. I mean, writing is all about side hustling. But I think that when it comes to talking about being a disabled writer, don't be afraid to write about disability, but also know that you are more than that. You know, one of the biggest things that I've talked about is that I don't want to be just the disabled writer and who's writing about disability exclusively. And I'm fortunate that in my job, I get to write about all the other weird things that interest me, but disability is also a part of that. So, you know, if you are interested in being a writer and you have a disability, know that you can talk about your disability or you can not talk about it. You know, if you want to write a 1,500 word screed about the way birds are used in television, like that could be your thing too. I mean, I think it's not about pigeonholing yourself. Just know that it's a lot of no, it's a lot of rejection, it's a lot of overwork for underpay, but the rewards are there if you have realistic expectations.
Kristin, what's the key to getting paid as a freelance writer? Because I did freelance writing, and they just kept asking for the invoice as if I never sent it for like months on end.
The secret to being paid as a freelancer is persistence. I don't want to say threatening, because that's not what I did. But persistence and knowing your worth. I think that's the biggest thing. As a woman who's disabled, who's a writer, knowing your worth is a really hard thing to know. And that's a big thing, is being like, hey, if this is going to take me 7 hours to write, then I deserve to get paid for 7 hours of labor. And that's slowly starting to change. But I think with people with disabilities, we're already told so often that what we're asking for is an entitlement or something that we don't deserve, that, you know, I've worked for free in a lot of capacities that I shouldn't have. So, you know, I think that's what the next generation really needs to own is their worth, and get that money. If you're doing the work, you should get paid for it.
Just keep in mind, you can't cash exposure. It doesn't.
Yes.
that is a great line. We should get a T-shirt with that slogan on it. You can't cash exposure. Thank you so much, both of you, Maysoon and Kristin, and this has been a wonderful conversation, and I really appreciate you taking the time.